Good place. She's pleased that again that the jury has found him liable, or guilty of 2 federal crimes.
What was her reaction?
And I've issued a statement as well on our Twitter as well. Her reaction is what I just said. Her reaction was that she was pleased that he's been found guilty and held responsible of 2 federal crimes, something that he's never been held responsible in his entire life. And she's happy that in November of 2023 she came forward and shined a light on this and brought other people forward who have various civil claims, and so we'll see what happens with the sentencing. All right,
Counselor,
thank you very much.
Looking at this direction, you said that same thing. Sorry.
Oh, I can't repeat it again, but
yeah, please.
I'm sorry. So, what was the question?
Yeah. Your reaction to what happened.
The reaction is that we're pleased that he's finally been held responsible for 2 federal crimes, something that he's never faced in his life. He still faces substantial jail time. Of course, we would have liked to have seen a conviction on the sex crimes in RICO, but we understand beyond a reasonable doubt is a high standard, and we're just pleased that he still faces substantial jail time. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
How much time?
Doug Wigdor, Wigdor. Well, each is faces up to 10 years on each. I'm not sure what the sentencing guidelines are given the various different things, but I'll leave that up to the government and the defense to argue. But I feel confident in saying he still faces substantial incarceration.
How will you feel if he walks out on bail?
Well, that's up to the judge. I don't have a personal vested interest in this case. Whatever the appropriate thing to do under the law is what should be done. And at the end of the day, he needs to be sentenced pursuant to the guidelines and pursuant to what the law is. My understanding of that is that he faces significant incarceration. So thank you very much.
Thank you. He's the attorney for Cassie Ventura?
Yeah, Wigdor.
The jury has reached a verdict in the Sean P. Diddy Combs trial. I want to hear your opinions and your thoughts and comments below. But before we get into the actual live reactions from a news outlet, let me read to you verbatim what the charges were, and the charges that he was found guilty of, and the charges that he was not found guilty of, and the potential sentencing to these charges. Count 1, racketeering conspiracy. Verdict, not guilty. Diddy could have been facing a maximum life sentence in prison. Count 2, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. Now this pertains to victim 1, who is Cassie Ventura. Verdict, not guilty. Minimum 15 years, maximum life in prison. He was found not guilty of the first 2 counts. Count 3, he was found guilty. Potential sentence is a maximum of 10 years in prison. Count 3 was for transportation to engage in sex workers, pertains to victim 1, again, Cassie Ventura, and commercial sex workers. Count 4, he was found not guilty, and that posed a minimum of 15 years and a maximum of life in prison. So based on these, count 1 and count 4, that was for a potential sentence of life in prison, Diddy was found not guilty. And there's no way he can spend life in prison because of this. Count 4 was for sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, pertaining to victim 2, which is Jane Doe. Count 5, he was found guilty. The potential sentence is a maximum of 10 years in prison. So, based on count 3 and count 5 of him being found guilty by the jury, Diddy still could face up to a maximum of 20 years in prison because of these 2 guilty verdicts. that pose a maximum of 10 years in prison each. Now, I don't think he's going to get a maximum of 20 years. I think they're going to cut these two counts in half, maximum of 10 years, and I'm sure he'll serve, well, the time served, which been, I think, a year, maybe less than a year that he's been in jail. They're going to include that time served, and I think he'll get maximum spending in prison, 2.5, 3 years, tops. Count 5 was for transportation to engage in sex working. Pertains to victim 2, which is Jane, and commercial sex workers. I'm not surprised. I'm definitely not surprised that he was not found guilty of racketeering. Maybe a little bit I'm surprised in the transportation, count 3, transportation to engage in sex working. But all of these victims and participants were of age. There was no minors included in this case. If there would have been minors included in this case, he would have been guilty of all 5 counts and serving life in prison. Do I think that Diddy should be released? I don't know. I keep going back and forth. I don't think he's a danger to society. He did not commit any of these acts against minors or, well, you can say people, adults against their will. But I think he deserves to be released and monitored. I don't think he's a flight risk. I don't think he'll harm the public or harm himself. With that being said, again, let me know your comments below, and let's get into the reactions from these news outlets. We'll talk soon.
Just closely here, Misty, because we are getting the verdict coming in right now. This is coming in real time, and we have count 1 here. This is the racketeering charge. We have the count here of not guilty on racketeering. This is coming in real time. We have count 2 also coming in here, not guilty. That is the sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. Count 3, we have guilty. Count 3 is guilty for the transportation of Cassie Ventura. That is guilty. Count 4, this is the sex trafficking of Jane. That's a pseudonym. Not guilty. Count 5, we have guilty. That is 5 counts. We have a mixed verdict here. Again, count 1 as it relates to racketeering, not guilty. Count 2 as it relates to sex trafficking, not guilty. Count 3, guilty. Count 4, not guilty. Count 5, guilty. Now, we should bring up here, Misty, all of these counts have a range of different sentences, a range of different evidentiary burdens, a range of different outcomes we could have had here. But it is a mixed verdict, if you will.
It's a mixed verdict, but it is a stunning victory for the defense. The Mann Act, these charges, these were the easiest for prosecutors to prove, the lowest hanging fruit, merely required showing that state lines were crossed for the purpose to engage in prostitution. We saw a lot of evidence on these charges, did not have that element, Laura, of force, fraud, or coercion. And this carries the lightest sentence of these charges. It is a maximum of 10 years. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, when you're talking about maximums aren't the rule. They are the exception. They're for the most exceptional and severe cases. So now you're talking about a sentence that's potentially in the lower range with time served because he's been behind bars. The fact that these sex trafficking charges, specifically with respect to Cassie Ventura, means that the jury was convinced by the defense, at least with respect to reasonable doubt, that the commercial sex, i.e. the freak-offs, were not connected to some of this violence, that there was not that force, fraud, or coercion element. That is by far, from a penalty perspective, the most serious. It carried a 15-year minimum. So that is a huge distinction. This is the best case scenario, in my view, for the defense. A lot of us opined yesterday that when the jury asked for a readback of Cassie Ventura and Daniel Phillips, one of the escorts' testimony, that read perhaps negatively for the defense. The jury was digging in to see if there was that force, fraud, or coercion. Clearly, it went the other way.
And, it's interesting because the prosecutors had told them, you don't have to find force, fraud, or, coercion on every single instance that he did this, right? You only have to find one. It doesn't have to be that this happened every time. But for the racketeering, you really did need to find a pattern of behavior. You needed to find a criminal enterprise that he engaged in with other people, right? When people think of racketeering, they think of the mob. They think of running drugs. They think of running guns. Now, federal prosecutors have used a far more expansive view of racketeering, especially in recent years in SDNY, right? Because they want to bring in all of the worst evidence. They want to stretch back the material decades ago. And so you've talked about how it allows them to tell a full story. Well, it turns out doing that in this case did not fulfill what the prosecutors had hoped, because obviously they have now cleared him. They have acquitted him of that top charge of racketeering. They have acquitted him of 2 other charges of using force and fraud, despite having that video, right, Misty? We talked about that video being so damning for him, where you see him on tape pulling Cassie Ventura by the hair. You see him stomping on her. The jury heard evidence that he actually paid money to a security guard to bury that video, paid him in a paper bag, and yet it wasn't enough.
It was not enough. So when it comes to the sex trafficking, yesterday, those questions that the jury asked for the readback with respect to the testimony aligned perfectly to what prosecutors in their closing argument said were 3 very obvious instances of sex trafficking, because they did not have to find that it was the hundreds of times that Cassie Ventura had testified that she engaged in these freak-offs. So prosecutors pointed to these 3. That testimony aligned exactly to that, what the jury wanted to hear. So here's where the defense clearly broke that chain, because what needed to happen was that the jury believes that the commercial sex act, so those freak-offs, that Cassie Ventura engaged in them because of that violence, because of the force that Combs was exerting, because of extortion about releasing these videos. But what the defense argued was there were lots of other reasons. There was jealousy in the relationship. Yes, there was violence, but it related to these personal romantic relationships that he had with both Cassie and Jane.
As opposed to being part of this masterminding of an enterprise.
And you know what's interesting, Laura? So now we opined about why the jury was not on the same page when it came to RICO. We said, was it because they couldn't agree on a predicate crime, or was it because they just couldn't get there with respect to the idea of this criminal enterprise, which has been very amorphous during the course of this case from prosecutors, hasn't really defined what it is or its purpose. And the answer is, it's that. It's either they didn't believe there was a conspiracy or the enterprise existed. And I say that because the Mann Act, these 2 charges are predicates for RICO. Yeah. So if they believed that there had been a criminal enterprise,
that would have been enough.
This would have satisfied the predicate crimes.
So that means they didn't satisfy that.